You're very welcome along to the polling station. It is our final one of 2022, but we feel that if this weren't a worthwhile polling station, we may as well never have another one. We have so much to discuss. What's happened in the US in the elections over the last few days has been quite staggering, to put it mildly. Rishi Sunak's been in the job for a few days. We're going to review what's happening there. And William, I'm all a little bit emotional here.
And so am I. I mean, the first thing to say is just thank you guys, because it's been an absolute roller coaster of a year. And I think it's fair to say we've covered quite a lot in these last 12 months, both in these episodes and, of course, the first time live streaming. A huge thanks to everybody who's watched this, who's liked it, who's recommended it, who's retweeted it, who's helped me host it. A couple of shout outs: David Stewart and Joseph Choney. They do an immense job with everything on the Star Content site. Ben Keefe, of course, for his support. He's not with us today, but Neil Channing has given us a lifetime of expertise, and everybody also who was happy to be a guest, including Torrin Wilkins and Jasneet Samrai of the Centre Think Tank. Hopefully they'll be back next year. Tessa Milligan and Emma Burnell as well, both from Labour, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of names. And last but never least, Ami Wylie. Huge thanks, because she let me stay with her in Tiverton, which is where we had that incredible live stream. So honestly, from the bottom of my heart to everybody else, thanks. And a huge thanks, of course, to Ben Keefe as well for making this all happen.
Beautifully put together as only you could, and as only Donald Trump could, of course. The timing of this polling station is essentially spot on, because despite what is essentially 3 failures in a row, and by far his worst set of election results, he is going to be in the race for president in 2024. And if I bring in a couple of pieces, Paul, just before I bring you in, the shining light really for the Conservative Party in terms of the elections over the last few days was obviously Ron DeSantis, who himself isn't exactly a likable character. And this did amuse me very much in the Business Post, which is sort of the business paper over here. So you have the one sort of right-wing writer in the paper would be Lucinda Creighton. And she said about DeSantis, who absolutely rocked home in Florida, his success in bucking the national trend for the Republicans has given the party faithful real hope. He is a true conservative, but one without the baggage of the former president. He is young, energetic, and he appeals to swing voters. The 2024 presidential campaign has just become very interesting indeed. And if you think this was absolute cringe, on the very same page, the editorial said, DeSantis is a hard-right populist loudmouth, an instinctive authoritarian, and a shameless culture warrior. He also happens to be the most prominent anti-Trump Republican, and Trump apparently knows more about him than everyone except his wife. How are you?
I'm very well, Johnny. Very well. I thought it was a brave call of yours to call it the last one of the year, given that the Conservative Party could surely dump their Prime Minister between now and Christmas. Yeah, I enjoyed last week. It's been a good year all round. I think it's been a really great year for political betting. There's been so many good markets and lots of good winners had along the way. And that was a nice way to finish with the midterms and what I think is the demise of Trump. One thing I would just say, as someone who is obviously unashamedly on the other side, so to speak, when I've opposed Trump over the years, it has rarely, if ever, been because he was right-wing, right, or a populist. I think he's an idiot, and that's his bigger problem. He can't stop lying. He talks absolute rubbish. Anybody who looks into depth into what he says, anyone who analyses it or his past knows he's talking rubbish. And he gets in fights on Twitter with Miss Universe and such forth, right? That's why I always thought he was a terrible candidate. I'm personally quite terrified by Ron DeSantis. I think that could play very, very well. And given the state of the world, I doubt the economy is going to get drastically better in the next 2 years in America. You know, he's going to take a lot of stopping because, and frankly, the person who might be the Democrats' best hope of stopping him is Donald Trump. Because there is a good chance that in the weeks and months ahead that the Trump treatment kills DeSantis, as it has killed many, many other candidates over the years. You know, we're going to have all manner of smears coming his way. But I think if DeSantis sort of gets through undamaged into 2024, then that's a very daunting opponent for the Democrats.
Marion McKeown, actually, in the Business Post, well, I'm quoting this for no particular reason, but she said, effectively, her headline was, America looked into the abyss and decided that it wasn't quite ready for that yet. And I think what Paul says, William, is quite profound in the sense that we're almost surprised that these absolute fruitcake candidates that were only there because they were backed by Trump failed, even in states that traditionally might have voted conservative. And I know Joe Biden has issues here, but a lot of these issues are entirely out of his own making. This was a flirt with fascism, with absolute fascism, and America is quite close to it. And DeSantis, if he is the answer, what the hell is the fucking question, like, genuinely?
Gosh, not sure I could answer that in a witty or family-friendly way. In all seriousness, it's probably who is to replace the uber populist void that has overtaken the GOP, and not just the upper echelons of the party, but the majority of GOP voters who are quite scarily normal people. Right? Like, these are just members of their community, and I think the scary thing is that you aren't dealing like in Britain. I know we have problems with political extremism, and I think they're underplayed. But it's not like I still think, say, you could go into a pub, you could go into a Starbucks or whatever, and you could hope not to have a realistic chance of not interacting with a political extremist. I don't think it's the same case over there, depending on where you are. And I think that it is a scary thought. Just with regard to Trump and his candidates' performances, I think it hammers home a really important thing, and it might well be the steadfast that saves American democracy. Sorry, people don't buy the 2022 election lie. They don't.
Yeah.
It's now been tried and tested in a number of ways, and when it comes down to it, most Americans believe Joe Biden is a legitimate president.
But sorry, just to briefly interject there,
Yeah,
if anyone in the pub said to you, he or she actually believed this, you'd be like, you're a fruitcake, I'm talking to someone else. A shitload of them actually do. An awful lot of them actually do. It's not so much that most of them don't. It's how come it's just such a large minority that actually do believe this rubbish?
I think you got a different media ecosystem over there in America. It's much less in terms of the formats. First of all, you have social media and the internet, widely used. This is huge on Facebook, which is by volume, I think, still the most used social network for Americans. It's also very prevalent on Twitter. You have a number of names that are respected, sort of giving credence to it, and you have a media ecosystem where this claim is out and about, and there's only so much fact checking you can do, because the debate in the public sphere sort of allows people to see it, and they think, oh, I believe that. Yeah, that does sound really suspicious. And elections are complicated things. It's not an easy thing to have a general election. We're waiting on House races still because of the methods of counting, because it takes so long. In fact, actually, in one particular race, Maine 2nd District, a glitch on 2 memory sticks means that they have to wait another day because there's 16,000 ballots still to be counted. It's a really toxic mix. It's really difficult, and all it needs really is the right circumstances to set fire to that touch paper, which we have seen, and somebody who was narcissistic enough to do it, which is, even for American politics, extraordinary. But Trump is that person.
Yeah, I'm interested. Just we will, before we I'd like at some point, William, just to talk to you about how the election went for Star Sports, because it was a hard one to call. But the betting, obviously, for the presidency, this is actually the first time I've seen this now. So DeSantis is 9-4, which may well appeal as value, because I get the feeling Trump's day is kind of over. I think he may have some hold over the party, but he's had 3 successive failures. Now, notwithstanding all his legal issues, I think he's just become yesterday's man. Hopefully yesterday's man who'll be incarcerated. But Joe Biden is 4s, as is Trump. And the thing about this is, Paul, I'm just not sure where Biden is in relation to his age at that time, and I'm not having Kamala Harris.
I personally am having one political bet at the moment, over and over again, virtually every day, which is having a few quid more on Joe Biden to be the nominee.
Right.
I just think the prices are incredible. Prior to the midterms, if we go back to the summer, it was about 6-4, 7-4, and I thought that was a good bet.
Yeah.
Because the midterms started looking betting-wise like they were going to go bad for the Democrats, it went out to 5-2 on Betfair, right? And now he's back into 13-8, 7-4. I just do not believe for a second that any heavyweight, anyone with a chance will go near challenging him. He will announce in the new year, as he strongly implied that he will, and it will be maybe he will be primary, maybe someone from the left will primary him, something like that, or some governor who just wants to raise their profile, like JB Pritzker, someone like that. But it'll be Biden, and he'll be 7-1 on.
Without being ageist, right? Without being ageist, I'm going to be ageist here, right? You do fear that over the, say 6 months is quite a long time in the life of a man of his age, notwithstanding the complexity of American politics. So you actually feel it's down to whether he wants to or not?
Yeah. Okay, let's deal with the age thing, right? Okay, so first of all, you're right. There is a price, a probability that a man of his age has some kind of incident goes downhill in the next 6 months, right? That is a price. It's still a long shot. Now, I watched him.
Or feels that the challenge is too much for another 4 years.
If he did that, he would be changing his mind, I think. I mean, I've watched multiple long interviews with him recently, long press conferences. He's completely lucid. He's on it. He's enjoying it. He's got an agenda, and he's delivering that agenda, something that he's obviously wanted to do for decades. And you know how many presidents stand aside? How many people don't run for the second term? Also, let's also remember, I mean, we're talking in Europe where leaders tend to be young, but look at America. Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, both in their 80s, right? It's quite normal. Trump's 78, right? It is more normal over there. And whether or not Biden is the best candidate, which is an arguable factor, I think he probably is. I think he's done a very good job, but then that may be because I support him and I'm not ageist, right? I think he is.
I was at a Bob Dylan gig last week, so I mean,
I've seen Bob Dylan many times actually.
There we go.
Yeah, but I think that he is overwhelmingly likely, like 80 or 90% likely,
wow,
to jump into the race in the new first part of next year. And when he does that, that rules out Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, all the serious Gretchen Whitmer, the serious candidates. And I think that in that match, he's a 7 on chance.
You've two essentially horrible characters on the other side, then on the right, William. Who, and I mean, I don't know how low Trump is going to stoop here.
As low as possible. I think one of the things also to note is I watched his announcement, and
did you feel that there was a little bit of a frailty there?
I was going to say, we're talking about Biden in his age. Trump has lost a step, right? He's lost a step or two. Now, whatever you might think of what he said previously, answer, it's obviously terrible and obviously absolutely insane. There was an energy with him, whether you like it or not. He could set rooms alight. Admittedly, they were full of his devotees, but when he was campaigning in 2016 and also in 2018, he was bringing a sort of genuine fire and fury. Sorry, Bob Woodward, I can't really give you much money at the moment, but in that ballroom yesterday, things felt flat. And he was definitely a part of it. I think the midterm results didn't help that narrative. He expected to be going now, I think, at least having endorsed a winning big Senate candidate. I think he thought Oz was the guy to beat Fetterman. And I think he thought Fetterman's stroke would take him out of it. Didn't. But there is a worry for a Trump backer personally that he's lost a step and he's also got legal troubles. And I think that's as much of a concern for him. It's just not being talked about because, quite correctly, people are now seeing him as the madman who caused an insurrection because he lost an election. And I think that takes away from his gloss as well. I think he's hit his political peak.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I don't think it makes DeSantis free money or anything. And I think DeSantis and the people around him are much more politically aware, much more politically wise. I think he'll think about it a good while before going for it. And as for his political prospects, he probably should. A lot of people have come up against Trump. Few have come out well on his side, if any.
Yeah, he has his legal problems. Is one of the best euphemisms I've heard on the show. One of the most
it's
understated.
the Reapian in me. 100 years at the BBC this week, so You never let any trainer give you lead.
William Kedjanyi never change. If I might be a psychologist, psychiatrist, or psycho here, Paul, for me there are shades of Hitler in Trump, in the sense that fascist, all of the rest basically tries to manipulate people because of their fears, blah 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 blah. But first of all, Trump isn't actually a young man, and secondly, because he's a narcissist and a fantasist, essentially, he could have told himself and made himself believe that the election was stolen. There was nothing he could say to make what happened last week better. And as such, he's probably waking up in the morning and it's harder to put on that rubbishy act that he's been putting on all his life.
I don't know that he is putting on that now. I think
that's what he is. That's what he is.
He's legitimately mad.
Yeah.
But I think Will's absolutely spot on about his deterioration. I mean, I would recommend to anybody, go back and watch the 2016 campaign if you can. Go watch a movie that I always tell people to watch because you learn so much from it. Is Get Me Roger Stone. It's on Netflix. But you see that campaign in that, and one of the takeaways that's not particularly relevant to the main storyline in it is Trump, and you can see that Trump has a glint in his eye when he's doing that. Right? It was an impressive campaign. It may have been a horrific campaign, and to take the Hitler analogy, look, I've been saying this for 7 years, and I've been saying it for 15 years about Putin. This is a model. These are people who've studied history and understand how you turn a country fascist, how you turn a world fascist, how you create a great leader, and they're following it to the letter, right? Now,
you must actually have been quite alarmed, because you have theories, which I wouldn't say at all are conspiracy theories, that effectively Mohammed bin Salman wanted Trump back in power. He obviously he basically reneged on the potential oil deal with Biden, but also the fact that by all accounts Putin's bots basically were up to no good again around election time, trying to spread lies, blah 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 blah. And if this actually were a good result for MAGA, the MAGA nonsense, this is kind of alarming for the world.
The Russian influence on the world, right, and the bots and trolls, the fake news, the fascism, the extremism, the gaslighting, that is all a systemic threat that's been there, and we won't acknowledge it. We still won't acknowledge it. I mean, we could talk about the UK and we talk about Brexit and the fact that still 6 years on, we won't acknowledge that, regardless of whether people honestly voted for Brexit or didn't, or whatever the deal should have been, Russia interfered. This was 50 years of Russian foreign policy. It happened. There's loads of evidence, and we still can't accept that. But one good takeaway from that election was that, to me, that was what the big picture that was on the line. The big picture that was on the line there was support for Ukraine, support for democracies around the world. And I've thought that Ukraine was the absolute centre of Trump and Putin from the start. And it really is. If you look at Crimea, you look at what happened in 2014 to 2016, it just is. It's part of it. People got to stop denying it and calling it a conspiracy theory, because it clearly was part of it. But the thing is that the one decisive thing from that election was, I think, is that Ukraine are okay. We will support them. The West is okay, because the number of Republican House senators and Democrat, there were some Democrats who were on this as well, right, on the far left, who would throw Ukraine under the bus. I don't think they're that relevant. I think they're a small number. And this would actually be another deterrent to Trump becoming the nominee. He doesn't really control that party.
Yeah.
I mean, Republicans prior to him becoming the leader were the hawks on Russia. They were the military hawks. They had the strongest policy on Ukraine. Trump turned it 180 degrees, right? He tried everything in his power to end investigations into Russia, into ending sanctions, into all manner of things he could do for Putin. He did a few of them, but ultimately he failed. America's still together. NATO is still together. Thanks to Joe Biden, NATO is stronger than ever. So that's the good news from it all. But I was still very worried about the global growth of disinformation and fascism.
Yeah, well, climate change might even beat us to the apocalypse in that regard. We've I think there's a conference on biodiversity in possibly is it Canada this week, and nobody's attending, and the Guardian is maybe make a nexus between that and the fact that there's a World Cup in Qatar. Be that or not as it may, world leaders are simply not attending, despite the fact we're possibly in the apocalypse. Speaking of apocalypses, William, how was it for the firm? And last word on the US elections to you.
We did okay. Not spectacular in any sense, but not a disaster. There were a number of good betting races. And in the end, the favourite on the off didn't do as well as might be expected, but they were tight and they were within margin of error. And there's always a big recrimination in polling circles. I mean, Paul knows this is very well as well. After any US election, seems to be pollsters are judged to have got it wrong and forecasters too. I would cut them some slack. I think those races were always tight turnout things, and Democrats did better than expected in that regard. I'd say probably about neutral. Didn't hear of much going on that was big. The Republicans went off strong favourites, about freeze on 75%, I think, for control of the Senate in the end. That was quite clearly off the mark, but I think overall just about even Stevens. I think it came at the end also of a long political betting year.
Yeah.
And normally for a midterms, you get a good crack at it in the sense that it's uninterrupted by lots of other stuff, because you have the party conferences and they end, and there's usually after that things are meant to settle down in the UK. Politely, that was not the case this year. So I think a lot of money and time focus went into that and went into Brazil. And I think there was a bit of a distraction. In the same way, to use a football analogy, that a World Cup or a Euros usually comes after a dry period of football. People research, they go and they load in, and there wasn't that this year. But it was interesting. A couple of favourites got beat. I think that was mainly it, and it was okay. Interesting, but no danger really.
Whether or not you're a fan of the Times, it's serialization of the book that somehow already come out, and Liz Truss's premiership has been absolutely compelling stuff, going all over the world, basically queuing 6 hours to take an Instagram photo under a bloody bridge and all this. I don't know, but three names for you to get into the UK section as we close the show: Dominic Raab, Matt Hancock, and Rishi Sunak, in whatever order you want, William.
Okay. I love this, like a pick and mix. You know what? Let's talk Dominic Raab, because the betting market is probably of most interest now is the first cabinet minister to leave the cabinet. Suella Braverman's 13-8, drifted a little bit from 6-4 earlier. Dominic Raab is 5-1. You could have got 20s a week or so ago before all of his behavioural stories came out. Chris Heaton Harris has drifted to 8-1, and Ben Wallace is 7-1, which I think is interesting and probably overplays, I think, the worry on defence spending. I mean, let's see tomorrow, right? But I think recent events have probably safeguarded the defence budget. I think if it's between going and taking anything from the MOD or more savage austerity, I think it's unfortunately more savage austerity. Raab is under the spotlight. He did PMQs today. It was a predictable beating from Angela Rayner. We talked about this, and the thing is, as good as you are at presenting yourself at Prime Minister's questions, at some point you need to have the positive record and the positive facts with you. You cannot you can't fumble your way through it all. You can't be slick all the way through it. And we've seen that with Sunak, who I think is better at Essington Johnson than Truss was, but in the day, the record speaks for itself, and Ralph struggled with that. I mean, he told Sunak that he wanted investigations into himself. I think he would probably told him he needed to do that beforehand, and it was a predictable beating. As to whether he'll go, I'm not entirely sure. I think there are probably worse bets in the world than 5-1 or so, but I wouldn't go crazy with it for a couple of reasons. Number one, clearly quite close to Sunak. Number two, all of the turmoil, I think, has hardened Sunak and anybody in government to wanting anybody to go. You've just had a new cabinet. You've had ministers shaking up all over the place. You've lost nearly 100 ministers over the last year. Do you really want to be a cabinet minister? I think probably what happens is Raab is forced to do an apology or NDA or something like that. But that's Dominic Raab. I'll let Sunak go to Paul.
The book, just before I go to Paul, is Out of the Blue. It's the inside story of the unexpected rise and rapid fall of Liz Truss, Harry Cole and James Heal, which was literally brought out on the 24th of it's out on the 24th of November, which is amazing.
Harry Cole, of course, is Carrie Johnson's ex.
Yes.
So very close to the action. But leaving her, just getting on to Sunak. Let's just get into Sunak, right? Look, I think he's fortunate. We were just talking before, Phil, and Will made a very good point, which is that when you've been up against chaos for the previous two, as we have for years, suddenly you can look, stability can look very appealing, and that is what the Sunak.
He wears a nice suit. He always dresses well.
He's very well, he's well mannered, which is what matters, right? But ultimately, Sunak and Hunt are two politicians with terrible records, right? If Sunak hadn't been given the free money trick with furlough, he'd be nobody. He'd be nobody, right? He ran the economy for 3 years and it was terrible. And the actions he took on the economy, such as raising tax, led Conservative members by majority to dislike him, right? To oppose him, right? They collapsed his approval rate. So I really would fear for his future. I don't think that he is any silver bullet to get them out of trouble. He'll probably alienate. I think there's a growing chance that the right wing splinter off 5%, 7% for some new Farage vehicle or something. And regarding Hunt, I just find it incredible that he has been rebranded as Mr. Sensible. He's openly admitting that the NHS is in total crisis, on its knees. Well, who was the health secretary? Who was the one whose reforms ruined it? Who was the one whose reforms who left us so poorly planned for the pandemic? And yet he's been promoted to Chancellor. I just find that incredible, and I find that symptomatic of a party that has been in government too long, is completely failing, and is heading for total disaster. And I'd add Dominic Raab to that as well. I mean, how Dominic Raab is the Deputy Prime Minister, beyond me. It's absolute.
Funny, I think I've been speaking of Labour at odds against to win the next election. I thought I think I was on about that early enough in Boris's term. But briefly, 2 to 5 is literally buying money.
But it is a 2-year wait.
Yeah.
Right.
It's 40% over 2 years. What do you want for 40%? It's a 2-year, you can back a 2 to 5 shot in a dog race. It'll take you 30 seconds. This will win. This will definitely win. I
think it will win. I do think it will win. Likewise, Starmer for next PM, because I can't see them changing it again. So who would they change to? One thing I would say, right, as well, I think it's quite important betting angle going forward is I think there is a really huge gulf between winning most seats and winning a majority. When Truss was in disaster zone and Labour majority went odds on, I thought that was terrible value, because when you go past the 80-odd seats they need to become the biggest party, once you go beyond that, you're into places they haven't won for a long time, or may never win. And what we're also going to see, we may see some by-elections that bear this out in the meantime, is you remember North Shropshire a year ago, right? Well, in North Shropshire, the interesting thing was Labour were in second. So the question was, if you want to beat the Tories, do you jump behind Labour or do you jump behind the Lib Dems? And yet somehow or another, they managed to get it all together and people realised, no, get behind the Lib Dems, that will work, right? But I can see a problem now when a lot of these Labour target seats, they're not really Labour target seats, and it would make more sense for them to stand aside and let the Lib Dems do it. So there could be some problems on that front.
Yeah, I suppose it should be noted that these by-elections generally took place under Johnson's tenure, which, to be fair, actually looked quite utopian compared to Liz Truss. And who knows how soon that's going to get on. Last word to you, William. We do have a little plug as well. And this indeed could be the last time we hear from you this year on the polling station.
Indeed. And on that note, actually, there's a group of people I've got to thank. The traders have been absolutely terrific. Head of trading Dave Jolly has given us lots of resources this year, and we've pulled on them quite a lot during a year which has not been light in sporting terms. So big thanks to him, big thanks to Kit Gilmore, big thanks to John Brackenridge, big thanks to Jordan Cox, also to Ed Dark as well for some updates and late requests, and also everybody in the trading room, everybody in the trading group, really supportive, and very much grateful to them for that. Just quickly on the next election front, I'd be inclined to agree with Paul. I do think Labour to win those seats is buying money. I just think it's how much can you tie up and stick with. I would still be leaning towards them for majority at the moment, but it is more complicated because, as Paul said, the majority requires them to take, the 10,000. They overturn the 10,000 star majorities. It requires a lot to go right, and also during a campaign where Starmer has not yet been tested. And I remember Robert Peston writing that you could imagine Starmer as a prime minister, but you could imagine him being elected one. I don't think it's quite fair, but I do think there's that stretch. So that would just be it for me on British politics at the end of this year, Labour firming the driving seat. By the way, just for poll watchers, about 10 to 12 points is crossover majority territory. At the moment, the average is 20. But tomorrow we will have the autumn statement, and the reaction from that, not just the snap reaction, but the reaction in a couple of weeks' time is really the one to watch, I would think. So yeah, that's it. And I think we got something special to show our viewers at the end as all thoughts head to the World Cup. Johnny?
We do indeed. You're going to hear from all the Star Sports shops, and whatever you think about the World Cup, a winner is a winner. Thanks to Paul, thanks to Neil, obviously, as we mentioned, who's no longer with us on the podcast. I don't think Neil Channing will ever die. He's basically just indefatigable, really. And obviously, thanks to William, who I think is a man with a massive, massive future in this game, and I don't mean gambling. That is the end of the polling stage for 2022. We shall talk to you soon.
And our World Cup odds: Brazil 9-2.
Hi, welcome to Kingston upon Thames.
We're 6-1 France.
Welcome to Kingswood Bristol. We are 7-1 Argentina.
It's coming home. 9-1 best price England here at Burnell on Sea. Come on, you Lions.
Welcome to Star Sports Platform. And our World Cup odds, 8-1 Spain.
Cricklewood calling, Germany 10-1.
Welcome to HARROW, where Netherlands are 10-1.
Welcome to Scarborough, and our World Cup odds, Belgium 14-1.
I'm Preston North Lane with 14-1 for Portugal.
Welcome to Rotherham, 28-1 Denmark.
Welcome to HYTHE in Kent. We're 50-1 Croatia.
Star Sports 11 June, 50-1 Uruguay. Vamos Celeste!
Here at Reading we have Senegal at 80-1.
Here at Midterm, we're offering 80-1 for Switzerland to win the World Cup.
Welcome to CLAPHAM! At CLAPHAM, we're offering you 100-1 for Mexico to win the World Cup.
Hi, from Pickering. Poland is 100-1.
Serbia, 100-1 at Tower Bridge Road.
Here at Liverpool, we're 100-1 on the USA.
And finally, here in Cwmbran, we're 150-1 Wales, our home team. Come on, boys!